I mean, one single mistake, I learned a couple years later, I could have made extra $400,000 of cash. If your records are off, you could do everything right. You could be in the right market, you could be the hottest thing, you could want a gazillion awards, super high profit margin, whatever. You're the only person, and something happens, you get burnt out, or worse, something, like an accident happens, and the business takes a hit. That's very risky for them.
All right, you beautiful motherfuckers. I am back for another amazing session. We got Alex Ngheim with us. And I think what you guys are going to find super, super exciting today is, besides that he's just like smart and attractive, is that Alex is a man when it comes to selling and scaling agencies and getting multiples. For those of you guys who are thinking about getting out of it. And well, firstly, Alex, why don't we start a little bit, just a little bit of your story, because you actually sold your own business and had to kind of figure this out and kind of left a lot of money on the table, not knowing what you don't know, as what Perry Marshall would call the stupidity tax.
Yeah. So first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm really excited about to be sharing this with your audience community. So yes, I built and sold my first company a number of years back. It was actually a tech company, and had all the right counseling in the world. Had lawyers that were paying, I was paying $400 or $500 an hour, had high accountants and everything. And without getting to all this esoteric of it, I mean, one single mistake, I learned a couple years later, I could have made extra $400,000 of cash. And so I don't know where the listeners listener is on your on economic. For most people I talk to, 400,000, it's a significant amount of money.
Yeah.
And so selling a bit, this is the thing that you were talking about, Frankie, is the things you don't know, those are going to be the one that's going to cost you the most. And the thing with selling a business, it's not something we do, every day, right? Heck, it's not something we do every year even.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of stuff that's very counterintuitive. And so my goal is to kind of share, my journey and the kind of, some of the things that we've helped our clients do as well. And my specialty and my team specialty is we focus specifically on digital agencies and tech. And there's a lot of overlap between the two, which I can get into a little bit later. Yeah. So there's very specific to when you're looking at scaling and then ultimately selling an agency. That doesn't happen, say, for example, growing a restaurant chain or something like that. There's huge differences between the two.
So I wanted to ask you, I mean, let's start kind of like at the very basics is, I know at different points I've had people say, I want to sell my agency either because they're burnt out, they're ready to cash out. There can be endless number of reasons why they get there. Like what actually makes an agency sellable? Because a lot of agencies don't know this, but they're not sellable as they are. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on just what makes a good criteria, something that can be sold, and what makes something that like needs to be fixed up or kind of polished or whatever. Like what kind of separates the two of those things?
Right. So let me take a step one back. So an agency, one of the reasons as an asset class. Okay, so now we have to think about this. When somebody's looking buying your company, they're thinking as an investor, right? They may be running the business, or they may be adding it to, like a portfolio of companies that they may already have, management team running. Regardless, it's an asset. That's the first thing you got to consider, right? Now, then the question becomes is how valuable that asset is. So one of my mentors said, you could always sell. It just may not be the price you want, right? So now the question is really like, do you want to sell at a price that you want to target? So an agency inherently has more advantages other businesses, mainly because unless you do project-based work, most agencies that we've looked at overwhelmingly have recurring income. That's a very, very big attraction, just the fact you're an agency. Now, if you're one of those agencies that still do project-based work, I would recommend the first thing is figure out a way to get to more recurring model, right? Again, most of the agencies that we work with, the vast majority of them, 95+% of them already have recurring revenue. But in case you don't, that's probably the first one. The second one is there's different reasons why people buy agencies, right? And it really depends on the profile of the acquirer. We spent a lot of time, talking about the ideal client profile, right? And what I've noticed that nobody really thinks through who's the ideal acquirer.
Yeah.
So I coined a term. This might be a writer downer here. It's the ideal acquirer profile, right? We have an ICP, ideal client profile, and you have what's called ideal acquirer profile. So depending on what the size of the business is, that acquirer. I'm going to use the word acquire versus buyer because the buyer may be the client of the agency. The person is going to acquire the agency. it's going to either be a private buyer or somebody that's in a what we call an institutional buyer, maybe like an investment fund of some form, right?
Yeah.
And they have different reasons, to buy that, right? So like I say, it's a private buyer, they have a different set of reasons. Institutional buyer, they have usually a longer list of reasons why they want to buy it. But really it comes down to, how healthy is the business? Is it trending upward, flat, or declining? Probably, it's worth mentioning. And is that, any business that's at least trending upward, you're going to get a higher multiple. The other one that a lot of folks don't really think through, and this is very counterintuitive, even for people that's already sold a company before, is your retention is actually more important than your net profit. I mean, within reasons, right? Like this business is making $500 of profit a year. This one's making $500,000. Of course, that's kind of extreme. But all else being equal, a company that has high retention is always going to be worth more than one that has low retention. Because if you think it through, right, a buyer, just these two words I want the listener to write down: risk management. That's the number one thing that drives all decisions on what to buy your business. Every decision that they make is going to be based upon that criteria, right? So let's go back to the previous point I made. Why is recurring revenue important? Well, because then they have a pretty high chance that it's going to happen again next month. So that reduces their risk, right? So they're going to pay you more versus a company so if you have a company here is doing, say, $200,000 of net profit, right? This one, but it's recurring. This one's doing $200,000, but it's episodic, right? You get a client, they lose them. You get another client, you lose that. Like basically you still get to the same number. This one's still going to be worth more because it's more predictable. So therefore less risk, right? Now, to the point about retention, this is maybe a little bit advanced here, but everything you can to retain that client one more month is going to make your company a lot more desirable. Even if your company is netting less than another one, but you have a long retention, a buyer is going to want that more. Because they can always figure out a way to get more customers, but if you have high churn, meaning you're always losing customers, they're like, man, if we put an additional $500,000 of marketing this thing, but these clients keep leaving as soon as they come in, it's a bottomless pit. It doesn't matter how much money we put in. This thing is just kind of like a bucket with a giant hole at the bottom, right? So the reason I say this is important is because a lot of times we're kind of taught, in a lot of circles, right? It just get the customer.
Yeah.
It's more important to actually get the right customers. And even if you were growing slower, but if you can retain them longer, that's a very, very, very big thing that's overlooked. You and I think we know the same, we try on the same circle, right? Frankie, like Dan Kennedy.
Yeah.
He has a saying, when a dollar's a dollar, right? That's true operationally. It is not true when you're selling your business. Okay. As I already mentioned, a dollar that appears once is not the same as a dollar is recurring. Likewise, a dollar from a client that's been with you for a year is valued way higher than a dollar from a client that kind of comes in and out. This has a lot more stability. This is kind of like a revolving door. So this is why there's a lot of stuff that's very things that when you run a business day to day, it makes sense. But from acquired, they're looking at it from a different lens. That's kind of what I want to help the folks in the community here think through. Like, how does a buyer look at your business? Yes, they're going to look at your accounting, they're going to look at your P&L and everything, but they have a certain lens they look through. They're looking through the lens of someone that's buying the business versus just running the business.
Yeah. And what you're talking about too, Alex, in many ways is what I always say is like turning an agency into a real business. Because I've seen a phenomenon that I don't think enough people talk about. I call it the 6-month hero run, where I see agencies get all the way up to like $200,000-300,000 a month. But it's built on unsustainable methodologies or foundations, or like, as you mentioned, it all churns out at the back end. And what happens is, even though it's awesome in internet marketing circles, you get fucking ClickFunnels award and you get to high five people. Investors don't look at that as a real business, because if they see it's all back to zero 6 months later, then you haven't really built anything foundationally. Whereas if there's a business that's only, say, doing $30,000 or $40,000 a month, but it has a 7-year history,
it's trending upward,
and it's continuous, and it's growing.
Right.
That's a very different thing from a real business perspective. And so I'd love to hear from you a little bit on, so like, say somebody's thinking about this, I'm watching this and I'm thinking, at some point, whether that's now or in the near future or in the distant future, I would like to sell my agency. Let's talk about some of the things that go wrong, the things that like most people don't even think of, the things you don't know that you kind of see over and over. Like, what are some of the common mistakes and kind of pitfalls people go through in this kind of journey to, cashing out, if you will?
Sure. So the first thing I would encourage is definitely, be part of communities like yours, right? I have a, it's a core philosophy of mine, right? ABL, always be learning. Like, I met unbelievably smart people, right? Like, like super high net worth folks and everything. And the ones I really admire, they're still humble. Like, they're sitting there taking notes, when you're up there, it's like, my God, this person's like, they could buy a small country, right? Or basically have any, do anything they want in life, but yet they're still sitting here. So philosophically, you want to be learning this ahead of the curve. I'm telling you right now, you do not want to be figuring this out in the midst of this. I don't care who you are. This is just way too complicated. It's going to move like a freight train. And like I said, for me, I had all the advisors in the world, and I was trying to figure out on the fly because it never occurred to me to sell my business, right? I was at, my business was, we had certain numbers, and then we became very attractive. And suddenly all these buyers came out of the woodwork. I'm just trying to figure this stuff out on the fly. So the first thing is give yourself enough time, right? To really like learn this, okay? That's one. Two, again, back to what I mentioned earlier about risk management. Really be obsessed about keeping accurate records. I cannot emphasize that enough. If your records are off, you could do everything right. You could be in the right market. You could be the hottest thing. You could want a gazillion awards, super high profit margin, whatever. But if there's any concern that the numbers are inaccurate, here's what's going to happen. One, worst case, the deal's off. This literally just, they don't care how much energy has been put into the look in your business. They're just going to pull the brakes on it. Because how is going to say, look, the business looks good, but how do we know it's accurate?
Yeah.
Again, too risky, right? So that's the worst case scenario. More likely what's going to happen is they're going to withhold back a very large amount of that money. So I'll give you a very specific example. So we're not talking abstract here. So my team and I, we typically focus on deals between 2 million and 20 million. We have a handful of deals at 50 million above, but for the most part, most of our deals are between 220 for now. So what's the deal, right? It was asking price was going to be 2 million cash at closing with another $500,000 and an earnout, which I'll talk a little bit later. Just think it's kind of like a bonus, right? We'll call it that just to make it simple. So $2 million of cash at closing, but it was the assumption, not assumption, but the representation by the seller. They said that we have a certain amount of profit, and that's what we're asking for this money, which the buyer was happy to pay. They weren't trying to beat these folks down. They said that's a very reasonable price for what you're asking for, right? But yet when they dug into the accounting, they're like, we can't account for about, roughly 100, I think about 100, let's just call it low mid six figures, okay, because I'm under NDA, a certain amount of money, right? We can't verify this. It shows up here, but we can't verify it over here. It's all checks and balances, right? And so they said, and they came to me, they said, well, we don't want to feel like the seller that we're kind of shortchanging them. But at the same time, it's too risky for us to release all of this, the entire 2 million. So literally because of a couple of key numbers they couldn't confirm, they held back $350,000 at the closing. Yeah. Now, it's not disastrous, but it's also not trivial either, right? I mean, you're sitting here expecting $2 million of cash, and then somebody said, look, you're going to get 1.65 million. Again, it's not at the end of the world, mind you. It's not like it's not like the seller's going to be in a poorhouse, but it's real money.
Yeah. And it's your baby.
It's only now. I'm sorry?
And it's for most of us, it's your baby they're talking about.
Right. Right. So now, 4 or 5 months later, I just got news that the fund is going to get released. And I said there's recording in about a week. But that was almost 4 or 5 months ago. Again, the money is, the money was never at risk, but psychologically, you're walking expecting X. Now you're only getting 65% of X, right? Roughly. And so you're like, well, that's significant. I'm sorry, you're expecting $30,000 or $50,000 more than you're getting this. And everything, I mean, they were growing like crazy. I mean, everything was phenomenal. Their margins were like better than, like probably 95% of the companies out there in their category. Everything was fine, right? They loved everything top to bottom. But yet just because the accounting wasn't, pristine, that's what happened. So that's one thing I would recommend is get as good financial controls as you can. Okay. So the worst thing you can do is mingle, and illegal, right? It just makes it more difficult. Like right now, we're doing another deal. It's SEO agency. It's taking easily an extra 2 months. I'm not exaggerating, 2 extra months. Okay. Because the seller they know this, and we keep encouraging them, hey, let's stop doing this. They say, well, it's so easy for me to do. Here's the point. They're running a lot of their accounting. They're commingling the funds, meaning they're using their business for, personal things. We all do that at some level, right? I mean, especially trying to minimize taxes. But I'm talking about like they literally run hundreds of small transactions through their thing. They buy a lot of stuff online, Say, well, it's just more convenient. My card's already there. I just buy it. I'm like, it would take you 10 minutes to put this thing on a personal card, but they won't do that. And because of that, we've added 2 months to the process. Because now the accountant's got to figure, okay, well, is this a real business? Or do we back it out and all this other stuff?
Yeah.
You see? So that's one thing. I'm spending a little bit more extra time on this because we all think that's, well, I want to grow. I have this, I have this, I have this, I have this. But if the accounting is not pristine, that's what they're basing their decisions on, right?
Yeah. And I can tell you this, by the way, as somebody who's like getting in more into like real estate investing, that like it's ruthlessly about the numbers and 0% about what somebody says about those. And I actually just had a deal we did last week where I can remember we sent them some numbers and the square footage was off by like 50 square feet. And then there was like an adjustment based on those 50 square feet because our numbers weren't right. And that's how investors are looking at your business, by the way. Mm-hmm. They don't care what you say about it and how awesome it is and how big the opportunity is and all the hype things that normally get internet marketers. They're just like, no, you said it was this many square footage and it's not. So we're going to adjust our number based on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some buyers, I mean, they'll be a little bit like, we're doing this deal right now, right? Like, for example, the one I was talking about, this agency, the numbers are a little bit off. And so because of that, that we're adding some time to it. So that's the one thing I would say. The other one is also, this happens a lot too, is I'm still enjoying the business. I'll sell it when I'm tired of it. You just cost yourself several $100,000. I mean, like that. Here's why. By the time you've already burnt out and you acknowledge you're burnt out, you've already been burnt out 6 to 12 months earlier.
Yeah.
And you haven't been growing the business the way you want because you realize, oh, wait a minute, if I grow this thing, it's more work for me. So maybe I'll cut back a little bit. You don't realize you're doing it. And I've had these almost heartbreaking conversations. I used to say, man, if you just came to me 6 months ago, not even 3 years ago, 6 months, maybe a year back, I could have gotten you extra $1 million easily. Yeah. But because there's certain things we're missing, or they didn't realize there was kind of like, I wouldn't necessarily call sabotaging the business, but they weren't operating at their peak.
Yeah.
Right. And without realizing the business kind of plateauing, or, certain things are just, the train was already kind of drifting a little bit.
Yeah. And I think so, we're all honest with ourselves. We know when that happens. Like everybody, this is an easy high ticket service businesses in general, not just digital marketing agencies, but they're very easy businesses to burn out on because you're so intimately tied to your marketing and deliverables, as where, if you sell e-commerce stuff, it's not like you're shipping the stuff every single time somebody orders it.
Right. So what you want to do is sell it on, again, it makes it again, think about the buyer, right? Risk management. If you're still trending upward, they still see for upward momentum, right? So I'm going to sell when it plateaus, or worse, it does this. You'll get a price. You probably won't be happy with it. You'll get a price, and you won't like the terms that's going to come with it. Meaning, I'll give you a crappy price. Oh, by the way, I wouldn't give you all that at close. I'm going to give you maybe 40% at close. I'm going to hold on the other 60% while you turn the ship around. Well, just think with that. Well, forget about going to your next venture, whatever that may be, right? Yeah. So that's the other thing too, is also waiting a little too long or not realizing the optimal time to spend. You brought up e-commerce. I'll share that briefly here. I was working with a client. We don't do e-commerce that much. Agencies and tech is the predominant thing, but occasionally we'll sell, we have a couple of e-commerce deals in the pipeline. So in e-commerce, here's what happened, right? They want to sell after the holiday season because they want to capitalize the holiday season. What do you think is going to happen after the holiday season in an e-com business?
Yeah.
Nosedive. Again, how many buyers do you think is going to buy a business that's dropped 90% from the last 2 months? Very few. Even if they know it's seasonal, most buyers are not that adventurous, right? So you do want to be buying when it's trending upward. Okay, because most people think buying a business, selling a business like a house, at a macro level, yes. Beyond that, it's very different. Here's why. When you sell a house, you turn the keys over, unless it's a really weird real estate transaction, you're pretty much out of that house. Emotionally, you may have memories of the house and whatnot, but you pretty much move on that house. most of the businesses, even if they basically don't want you around long term, there's a transition period.
Yeah.
Right? Why is that important? Well, if you're so burned out that you don't want to run anymore, you're not going to want to stick around during transition. Well, no buyer in their right mind is going to buy a business unless you want to stick around and help support it, at least for,
And then you end up, by the way, for those of you guys, like the whole, the anti-reason for starting is you end up being an employee for someone else, where they say you got to work for me for the next 2 years. And as Alex mentioned, mentioned, you got to like right the ship before I'll let you loose. And then you end up being like having these golden handcuffs where you got to,
So for us, what we do is in an ideal situation for us is the seller, they want to move on. Like some of our people that sell the agency, they sell it, as one reason they sell is they have a lump sum so they can start the next venture. It depends on where they're in their life, right? They're in their 50s and 60s. It's probably going to fund their retirement, or at least the majority of it. In their 20s and 30s, they're young enough where they're, they want to like we have one client right now, they're looking at selling the agency. They're and then they're looking at either taking that and funding a tech venture, so that way that's a pretty significant amount of startup capital, right? Or basically, go, basically become more of an investor versus, somebody running the business. So that's another one right there, is also, being clear on like when's the best time to sell, right? Again, you could always sell, but the time to get the best price is when the business is trending upward. And then the third thing is, I would say also, it's not really understanding, the minds of the acquirer. And here's what I mean, right? Because if I'm an acquirer, so let's role play for a second. Again, I mentioned earlier, right? There's different types of buyers. Each acquirer has different criteria in what they value. Like an investment fund is going to be more adamant about your stuff being really strong on processes and everything, mainly because they're unlikely to want to keep you around.
Yeah.
Right. Many investment funds usually have their own team or something. Again, I'm making very broad statements here, but there's some that want to keep you around. So they're probably going to be drilled down a lot more in your processes and, and that and all that. Whereas if somebody's buying it with the intent of stepping in to run the business, we call those owner operators. Like they're buying it and, they're taking your place of running the business. Yeah. Those, the process is going to be just as important. But then they're going to be looking at more like, okay, what's a way for me to recoup? Because it's a lot of time, it's their money. An investment fund is usually somebody else's money. An owner operator, like an individual buyer, is going to be more their money, right? And so in that case, they're going to want to know, hey, what are a lot of untapped opportunities here that could quickly recoup my, my investment? Because that's, a lot of times it could have been their retirement money. It could have been money being saved for the last 10 years, until this opportunity was available to them or something like that. So when you have those, you have to kind of understand how to talk to an acquirer, the potential acquirer, and understand, what to emphasize, right? Just as we're different versions of the sales law, depending on who our client, who our avatar is. It's a similar thing here, right? You want to understand there's different types of buyers that are out there, and then the other one is really not I think trying to squeeze a little too much out of the juice. And here's what I mean. It's very easy to, when you're a solo operator, right, you can run this thing and have very little overhead, have very, very high margins. But what scares the bejesus out of a buyer is that, acquirer is like, if you're the only person and something happens, you get burnt out, or, worse, something, like an accident happens and the business takes a hit, that's very risky for them. So even though it may lower your margins in the short term, it's best to at least have some semblance of a management team. I don't mean you need to have a CFO, a CM. I mean, I don't mean that level, but at least somebody is handling sales, right? Yeah. Even part-time. Somebody is doing at least, some of the, biz dev, so that it's not all, dependent on you. By the way, when you're talking to an acquirer, and when you tell them that 100% of your sales come from referral, you may think you're bragging. All they hear is risk, and more risk. Yeah. I am like, they're like, next. Yeah. Okay. So do not put yourself in a position where 100% of your sales come from referrals. Now, if refer from your client base, that's almost acceptable, because we did help one client exit like that. It turned out that their clients were referring to business, but I'm talking more about the fact that personal relationship. Yeah. Right. So that's that, like a lot of business, depending on how far along you are, depends on a lot of referrals. That makes also a business very nervous as well. Yeah. So in an ideal world, have at least two ways you're getting, clients. 3 is even better, but you may not be that far along. So it doesn't have to be 50-50. It could be 80%, you're getting from this one thing, right? Facebook ad, this one's 20% referrals, or 80% referrals, 20% paid ads. At least acquire, look, you've at least done the hard work for me. You've proven that you could do something beyond depending on referrals, right? So now I said, okay, we're not going to get there overnight, but at least I've seen that you've proven that you can get clients based on more than just your good looks and your reputation. Those scares and acquire loss. I would say, there's a lot more, but that's probably enough for now. It's just have really, really clean books. And by the way, if you're going to do this, again, it's gonna sting financially, but really, ideally, 3 to 6 months before you sell, work with a CPA firm that understands, that's actually been involved in an exit. We're working again on another deal where the accounting firm is very, very competent, but because they've never done an exit, I'm educating them how to I need that report. Why do you need a report? Well, because my buyer's never gonna, my acquirer's never gonna, I'm representing the seller, but I work with both, right, the buyer and the seller, because they're not gonna buy anything without the report. Well, we don't use that day to day. Well, great, but this is not day to day, right? You sell the business, once during this lifetime, or at least doing it for that period. And so that's the other thing, right? As you basically improve your financial records, work with somebody that's at least has had some experience, been involved in an exit. If they don't, then you're going to be educating them. If you've never done it, that's going to be, kind of tough, right? The second thing I said is you're having a business overly dependent upon referral. And then the third one is really, selling a business when you feel like, hey, I'll do this when I'm burnt out, or when the business not doing so well. Well, now the business not doing so well, most buyers are probably not pay you a premium. So
I can actually just before we kind of move on to what I wanted to ask you about next, but I can confirm a little bit of what Alex is saying, because I can remember partner of mine, Josh, where we were looking at a plumbing business a couple of weeks back, and there was so much to like about it because they had teams in place and systems and operations. So as far as the plumbing, I would never have to, go out there with my plumber's crack and get under a sink and adjust some pipes. So, that was our biggest fear. And so what we were looking for is a situation where they essentially lacked marketing, and we could put that piece in and double or triple the business and then again, sell it later. But the issue we ran into is as you mentioned, the owner was getting all the business from referrals. And so it's our thought is, okay, if he leaves, then are people still going to want to refer? Because everybody knows this guy in and around town as the guy. And if the guy is no longer there, are they still going to refer those? Because I'm guessing probably not. And then the second thing is there was a licensing thing where the whole business was licensed under him. And if he were to leave, in his particular state, it wasn't easy to get us a license.
Yeah.
And even though 99 out of 100 boxes are checked, that one unchecked box is so much risk to a buyer that eventually we just had to say no and kind of walk away.
Yeah, or you would have to put in so many contingency there. Look, you'll get 10% now, and I'm going to drip out 10% every year, every 6 months, right? I mean, to the point where if he was motivated, we might stick around. But yeah, so you're confirming what we're talking about, because you were sitting on the other side of the table.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's it's a great business in a lot of ways, but it's man, if this owner goes and all his relationships go with him, I can see this being at zero in 3 weeks from now, and then I essentially just paid money for nothing. So I wanted to ask you a little bit, so you
I want to say something.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm sorry. Okay, give me a second. Yeah, I want to say something here. I don't want, if you're listening to this, oh my God, my business got to be so pristine. It's got to not have a speck of dirt, and it's got to be precise to the night. No, that's not what we're saying at all. Okay, a lot of what I'm saying is an ideal situation. Trust me, I've saw where the accounting records wasn't pristine. As you saw, basically they just held back the money. The deal still happened. My seller was ecstatic with the money, right? It's just that $350,000 was held back. Again, not the end of the world, but it could have been averted had they known that. It's the first exit. They're going to do 2 more exits with me. So then the next time I say, hey, we just have to have better financial control. Likewise, if you are dependent on referrals, it's not like nobody's going to buy the thing. It's just that a lot of buyers will say, man, that's kind of risky. Again, they're probably going to adjust the price or say, look, until you put in another second thing, we can't pay you top dollar. So you can still sell it. I'm just trying to give you things that you want to do to get top dollar. I'm not saying that you had these things, the deals, oh my God, nobody's going to touch it. There is no such thing as a perfect business. I'm telling you, even Apple, if you spend an hour on Apple, you've got to be kidding me. This is a public company. What the hell? This is so, when you're running business, there's so many things happening, right? So we're just trying to give you things that, that if you know about, you can at least keep an eye out for it, right? So now when a acquirer comes back and says, well, we're concerned about this, you don't think, my God, like this guy's such an a-hole. Why is that a big deal? Well, because to them it's risk. You see, if you understand what they're looking at, you kind of have to, you have a much better idea of how they're looking through their lens. So just kind of want to make that comment. So totally. Otherwise, nothing would ever get sold. Trust me. Like no business would ever get sold if they have to be pristine and everything is, tip top shape and everything.
Yeah, and service businesses like we do are they're awesome to get started, but they're generally imperfect business anyway. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about like your skill set. So you help people work as a broker. And for a lot of people, they don't understand this. When they see a broker, they look at, like, this is universally true across industries. They look at the fee they're taking, but not the value add they're bringing for that little fee. Sure. And in your case, you're a 100x value add, but I'd love to hear just, some of the things that you do that help people facilitate this and just make this whole thing easier and more value and like find hidden money and find quality buyers, and a little bit about how your skill set fits into people who are thinking about this sales process.
Right. So as Frankie said, right. So just for succinctness, I tell people I'm a broker, but for positioning perspective, there's a meta lesson here. I tell people I'm a business advisor that brokers businesses, right? And why do I do that? Because as the joke goes, brokers are viewed as worse than pond scum, and that's on a good day. So they said that, right? So that's why I tell people that I'm a business advisor that helps people, sell their business. But anyway, all joking aside, the value we add is that we know what the buyers look for, right? Plus, we already have a buyers network. So if you come to us, if you're like an agency, roughly in our sweet spot, give or take, we probably have like 5, 10, 20 buyers already interested in that. I speak to so many buyers on a weekly basis. Let's just say it's a lot, right? Now, here's the part that might blow away most people, right? Because, it's a different world, right? They're like, man, like, because you talk to a customer, they're like, man, like, I don't know, I can afford $500 a month, $1,000 a month. And then you're like, who the hell is this person that's got this $1 million checkbook that's going to buy my car? Like, what the hell is this thing? Like, is this some sort of like, three-eyed, like a dolphin that's, whatever, right? Like this weird mythical thing that's out there. Trust me when I tell you there is a staggering amount of money in the world. In fact, the number one thing that my investors talk about, they complain about, is not enough deals.
Yeah.
I have one investment fund, just one, not 20, just one. They're sitting on $100 million of cash. And the number one thing they contact was, Alex, when are you going to get us more deals? Like these folks, that's like these investment funds, call it whatever you want, investment fund, PE companies, whatever, I just call it investment fund as a broad term. Their job, in fact, how they get their bonus, whether they keep their job, meaning whether they get fired or not, depends upon them deploying this money. Okay, so I'm just kind of put it out there. It's until you talk to somebody like myself, you're like, okay, like that doesn't make any damn sense. Well, that's their job, is deploy this money, right? So why is that important? Well, because we have a relationship with those folks. Meaning, if you come to us, we can move the business very, very quickly because we also know what they look for, right? Before you go to market, we say, look, we may want to take, most of the folks that come to us, they usually want to sell within 6 months. The person wants to sell 3 years from now, we can still help, but that's a tightly different person, right? But usually, if you're selling 6 months or less, there's certain things you can do to reduce the risk tremendously. Make it so that way the buyers are much more likely to buy it. Likewise, depending on who the buyer is, we can then also identify certain things in your business that you may not realize it's valuable, right? When we emphasize that, we can also increase the price tremendously. Now, at the size that we're talking about, even a slight bump, we're talking about several $100,000, right? Like I had one agency, they literally thought like, well, the business is, because the partners, they kind of lost interest in the business. One got more, interested in commercial real estate. So the business was kind of like dropping, right? And they were shocked when I got them a sale for over 7 figure, to the point where like they're calling all of their buddies, saying, man, like, look, if you're selling, you need to like take a serious look. You may not think this is worth that much, but because, a lot of folks, I've literally had Facebook threads that say, anybody's buying anybody that's, anybody could tell you they could sell an agency is a scam because I don't enjoy running this agency, and who would buy this thing? Well, that's because that person's burnt out, right?
Yeah.
But if they're sitting on a business, got two, maybe 50, 100 customers or something, it's worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
So what we do is we identify areas that we can emphasize to the buyer, hidden profit centers that, while it may not increase the value of the business, it makes it easier for the buyer to say yes. So let me clarify the point I just made there. So it's not so abstract. We're representing one agency, right? They, over the years, they've had, give or take, 3,700 customers. It's almost a $30 million sale. The buyer is a private buyer, so this is a very large amount of, it's a large amount of money for anybody, but it's a stretch for them. And say, man, like, this is really gonna like stretch me. I don't know if this is. I said, well, here, I'll tell you what. So I walked them through and said, look, you see these 3,700 buyers? Said, yeah. Well, many of those have bought a $5,000 product. This is a training / agency. They do training. They also agency services. And they bought like a $5,000 product. Yeah, I could tell you for a fact, okay, that at least 3% of those people are going to buy a $10,000 to $15,000 program. I'll even walk you through how to do it. Now, if you want us to do it, we'll do that as a separate fee, but I'll walk you through how to do that. So right there, that wasn't necessarily for the seller, but I helped the buyer saying, hey, yes, it is a big purchase, but just doing this couple of things that Alex is going to talk about, I can recoup back between $400,000 to $500,000 conservatively within the next 90 days. So it made them a lot more comfortable to pay top dollar for this thing, because they're paying top dollar for this thing, but the entire time they're nervous as hell they're going to get their money back. The deal may never happen.
Yeah.
You see, so even though I represent the seller, I get paid by the seller at closing. I also work with the buyer to help them understand that, hey, these are some ways you can recoup the thing. You could cross-sell your services. You could combine the forces, all kind of different things so that it makes sense. Because a lot of times the buyer, unless they're very sophisticated, they're just seeing a bunch of spreadsheets. They're like, okay, well, I'm going to pay X dollar for this thing. If at this current run rate, it's going to take me however long. I said, well, yeah, but there's all these profit centers that you can accelerate that payback period. Yeah. So it reduces down the risk for them tremendously, to the point where they'll make a decision a lot faster. Because trust me, if a buyer's like nervous, they're gonna take forever to make a decision, because it's probably their biggest decision they made, especially if they're a private buyer on their side, right? So we figure out, like, we help people by helping them get up to speed on the psychology of the acquirer, right? Like knowing what to emphasize depending on what type of profile they are. The other thing is we help to identify, hidden profit centers, so that way the buyer can make a decision faster or a little more peace of mind. So they're going to come to the table, come to the closing table a lot faster. The other one is we can help also, depending on the business being represented, we can then also help identify difference between financial buyer and strategic buyer. Financial buyers are more ones that buy more on numbers. Strategic buyer are more like, well, you have some capability that's very strategic or expansion, they're going to pay a premium. Those are a lot harder to find. And I'm not saying we could always find out for everyone our client, but they'll pay a much, much higher thing. So there's and then the fourth one is really just understanding this process, right? Because while it is true that similar like selling a house, it's also significantly more complex. Here's what I mean. You've done real estate, Frankie. So in real estate, when you get an offer, unless they're just kind of, like they just completely like, it's like, like they have, they're a little bit, kind of like what's the word I'm looking for? Unless they're just, kind of like a one-off. Most of the time when people make an offer, the offer goes through, right? Why do I bring that up? Because when I'm working with a seller the first time, if they don't understand the process, they say, well, how hard can it be, right? I'll just advertise this thing. I'll do this on my part-time, it's just kind of on the side, right? I'll get a bunch of offers. Let's just pick the right one. Ta-da, right? I said, well, yeah, I guess in a way that's true, but you just left out 95% of the real story, right? Because there's like back and forth, right? Like just because you got an offer, then you got to figure, okay, well, is that offer solid or not? And also, is that offer, what is it backed by? Like, where's the funding source? All this other stuff. Because unlike real estate, funding the acquisition of business is a little bit trickier than funding the, the purchase of real estate. Real estate is a very well-known asset class. Business as a whole is a little bit more complicated. So the buyer may actually think the thing is going to get approved. And then there's times I have to step in and tell the buyers, like, your funding is not solid. Oh, but no. This is what you were told by your lending source. I can tell you for a fact this doesn't happen. And so my point is that I'm educating the buyer as well, too. You see, or sometimes even a professional investor will say, hey, why is this thing a premium? Like, because we're used to buying this. Yeah, you've been looking at another asset class. Like you've been looking at brick and mortar company. Agencies are valued differently because of recurring income. You see, so that's why I was kind of joking earlier. A lot of brokers, unfortunately, again, I'm making a very broad statement, they just list the thing. They don't really understand all these nuances I'm talking about. Yeah. I've owned my own company. I've sold companies. I've bought companies. I've been an advisor for almost 30 years. So I can pretty much almost not predict, but anticipate where things are going to happen proactively, right? And by the way, it's very easy for these things to get stuck forever. It's called deal fatigue.
Yeah.
Meaning the deal just wears everybody out, and the deal it just quietly kind of like just dies.
Yeah.
Not like in an explosion, but just kind of quickly just loses momentum. It's just kind of like a train track ran out of gas. It just kind of dies a little bit.
Same thing happens.
4 months later, people are like, what the hell happened? Deal fatigue.
Yeah. I've seen it in real estate too, where you mentioned where
you
get a broker who just like is they got their weekend course, they list it, nobody comes to their listing, and that's basically all the steps they're going to take, right? Is to drive people there. They're not going to go actively find buyers and figure out or even understand what the buyers are looking for to present it in a different way, or all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you got to look from our perspective, right? We don't get paid until the thing sells. So we don't think we could sell it. We're like, we have to pass because it's like we can't tie up all our resources to market something. Those horror stories you hear about, like 80-90% of the businesses that are listed, by the way, that's a real statistic. Depending on which survey you see, between 80 to 90% of businesses that are listed, even healthy ones, don't sell. 80 to 90%. Think about that.
Yeah.
That's what representation for us, our batting average is significantly higher. It's not 100%. Nobody has 100%. But if we don't feel, we have a very high level of confidence we can sell it, we have to move on or ask them to, work with somebody else, because it doesn't do us any good. And the last thing I want to do is tie up somebody, unnecessarily, because this is probably the biggest financial transaction. In fact, it will be, the biggest financial transaction they'll be involved with until the next one.
Yeah.
So, we have to kind of look at it. So we look at this thing as an advisory project where the outcome is the sale of the business. We're not just listing it. We actually get involved, probably by now, we get a lot more involved in it, advising the buyer, the seller, and then heck, we even help them connect with, firms that help them minimize their tax bite. Because trust me, if you get a $2 million payday, Uncle Sam's going to want a big portion of that.
Yeah.
And unless you know how to deal with that that tax bill you're going to get, it's going to be significant. And so we even help them. We're not tax expert, but we know people that can help them navigate through that so they can keep, they can save that. So anyway, those are some of the ways that we help, value adds that we do beyond just like listing the business, right? The listing the business is very mechanical. I can show people how to do that within 15 minutes, quite honestly. But to understand all the nuances, all the levers to pull, all the stuff to talk to the buyers and the sellers. And here's a dirty secret that most people never tell. This is probably too much information. If it's every deal is so delicate. Even when people are all in, all it takes like one or two things, and for a seed of doubt to get planted, and then suddenly everything just like, okay, wait a minute, okay, time out. Because somebody says something inappropriate, or they're asked for something that's completely so different. I'll give you a great example here. During the sale of a business, there's a very key milestone called the LOI, letter of intent. Okay. I've heard there are people that can do this. I've yet to meet them. So I'm going to, for now, I'm going to say that it's not, because I've met a lot of folks, right? Part of that is that the buyer is going to require that you take the business off the market, because at that point, they're going to incur like a ton of fees, to actually do the inspection. Like in real estate, it's called the inspection, right? Except with a business, it's like an inspection on steroids.
Yeah, like a due diligence of form.
Exactly. But the key thing here is that it's got to be taken off the market, and there's exclusivity enforced, right? A seller's never done it. Say, well, I'm not agreed to that. I'm not going to accept that. I'm like, I'm sorry. This is like something that's been done for over 150 years. This is kind of like part of the thing. Like, I don't get to write that rule. Like, this is generally accepted, right? So, well, we're not going to move forward without that. I'm like, so basically you're saying we're basically just going to sit here and be in limbo forever, because no buyer in their right mind is going to incur, like, by the time a buyer buys the business, they're going to incur anywhere between 2 to 3% of the purchase price conservatively. Okay, that means on a $2 million deal, we're talking about $60,000. Now, would you go spend $60,000 on a deal that they may sell right behind you?
Yeah.
It's just hell no. So that's why they have to enforce that. But if you're a seller, you don't realize that, and you push back on me, or worse, the buyer said, no, I'm not gonna, you got to remove this clause. I'm gonna want to continue shopping for a thing while you're doing this thing on. It's like, no, that's not how it's done.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean. I said everything is a little bit delicate, because if you don't know this, you say, well, hey, look, we'll just ask for this. No, that's not something you could ask for. It's either that or they don't move forward. And so I've had to actually talk to my sellers, especially someone that were sold, said, I realize that's what you want, but they're not going to agree to that. And if we keep pushing on this thing, that buyer's going to, unwind. They're just going to move, because they're going to say, you guys don't know what you're doing. We just completely shot our credibility with them. You could have done everything right, but that one single request could completely torpedo the whole deal. And we've had it happen. And at that point, we said, look, unless you're willing to change this, we have to disengage with you as a client, because we cannot ask that of the buyer, because that's just not done. You see?
Yeah.
Because you're trying to change something that's an industry practice.
Yeah, it's a dance, and if you don't know how to do the dance, one misstep and everybody trips over each other's feet. Alex, just to be respectful of time here, I wanted to see if you could give your book a plug, anything else you want to do for folks who are interested in taking the next step, or at least finding out what they can potentially do to sell their agency and learn a little more from you, because I think those who are interested, I don't personally know of a better resource than you. You're the man.
Yeah, so we have a website, and I'll have that you can download a checklist. These are 5 things you can do to improve the value of the business. The website is called myexitchecklist.com. Again, myexitchecklist.com. And then I'll ask my team to add also a link. A lot of what I covered about here, again, this is a very deep topic, right? But I wrote all of this in a fairly easy to read book. I could have made this a 400-page book, which by number is going to read it. I've made this about maybe a 60, 70-page read. You can read this probably probably 1, maybe 2 sittings at most. And it's written so that, more like a series of blog posts, like 800 to each chapter is like 1,000 words. So that way they're very, very self-contained. And this is really, my knowledge of the experience backed by, real world case studies. So just go to that website, myexitchecklist.com, and you'll get that checklist. I'll have my team add a link to download this book. Right now, the only way to really grab this book is, hear me speak, or, we met at a live event, because I don't make this generally available, to the public. Maybe one day I'll put it up on Amazon. This is my 6th book, by the way. So I'm not in the business of, making money selling books. There's not that much money in it, but it's a great guide. As far as I know, it's the only book on the market about how to sell your agency for 7 figures or more. So
yeah, that's huge. All right, man. I appreciate you sharing this awesome wisdom. And those of you guys who are interested in selling an agency, check that out, because as Alex has mentioned, you can leave a lot of money on the table, and just as he mentioned, it only takes 2 little things to screw it up. I mentioned the plumbing deal, exactly like you said. There was just 1 or 2 things they said that said nope, right there, that's a deal breaker for us, because that's too much risk. So you guys, if you're thinking about doing that, you will not find a better resource than Alex. So make sure to check that out.
Yeah, like I said, this, the book here talks also about stuff like, when should you sell? There's some introspection you want to do, right? Like I tell people this, as a takeaway, selling a business is as much an emotional decision as is a financial one. In my early days, we got them a lot of money, they're happy, right? And I contacted them 3-4 months later, like, man, I didn't think it was going to be like this. So what's wrong? It's well, I didn't really think through what selling was. We don't want to sell. Obviously, we get paid when you sell the business, right? But if it's not the right fit, time-wise, emotionally, you're not mentally prepared for it, or emotionally, we'll be the first to tell you, you're not ready yet. Go do some meditation. In the book, we give you some advice, right? Do some meditation, talk to another advisor, talk to us or whatever. We're not going to sit here and say, look, because this is not like you're not selling a course, right? We're done and we move on. When you get involved with this, it's going to take several weeks, some case several months to get to the exit. So you have to know going into it emotionally what that's going to be like.
Yeah.
Right. So really, so there's stuff you want to do before the exit. There's stuff you do during the exit, and there's stuff you want to consider after the exit. And that's kind of what you're putting earlier about where can we help, is even that emotional journey. Right. Because if you're doing this thing and you're mentally exhausted and emotionally, going through this roller coaster, is it really worth it? So there's ways to kind of address that even. So
Badass. Appreciate you coming on here and doing this. And thank you again for those awesome resources, my man.
No problem. But I really enjoyed this, Frank. By the way, it's this plug for you. I read a lot of books, and I've written, several.
Oh,
I thought your book was hysterical, and I thought it was really well put. So kudos to you. I mean, if you're part of Frankie's community, you haven't checked. I'm telling you, I've been in agency work for a long time. That book has got some really, really cutting edge and really, really revolutionary ideas in it. Definitely, you haven't gotten his book, definitely check it out as well.
thank you, my man. I appreciate the plug. All right, take care, guys. Guys, if you like this video, you're also going to want to grab some free bonuses, which you can get at our website, Beyond Agency Profits. To make it easy for you, I've put the links to it in the description of this video, as well as pinned in the top comment. And we've got a couple of awesome things. This is what you'll get after you sign up. You get some of our best training, how we're closing clients over Loom videos, how we sometimes sign clients that is not a misprint for under $5 US. How to demonstrate your value in like amazing ways, trainings, how to have your clients write the best copy of your life, how we're closing without phone calls, campaigns that we've generated for clients that have done over $100,000, as well as scripts you can use to get conversations going with clients in under 10 minutes. All you got to simply do is go there, enter your name and email address, and then this is what you'll see on the other side. So if that's interesting to you, make sure to click the links below, and I will see you on the other side.